Shinobu Part 2. Okay, so when last we left Shinobu, that had been revealed that Kanjuro was the traitor, although she wasn't on the boat when it happened. She was over on the shore when guarding Momonosuke when the real Kanjuro popped out of the bushes, essentially, and attacked her, wrapped her up in one of his snake drawings, and kidnapped Momonosuke. Captured Momonosuke. Is it kidnapping if they know exactly where he's taking them and they see exactly what happened, or is it just capturing him in this case? I think in this case it's just capturing him. But Kanjuro captures Momonosuke after, Kawamatsu shows up and tries to fight him and then frees Shinobu, so they're all headed off that way. Luffy and all of the other rest of the members of the Samurai Mink Samurai Pirate Ninja Alliance. I think those are in the wrong order, but same difference. That would be really confusing if there was one that was titled this and then another one that was titled this, and then it's like they're like, whose side are we on now? I'm confused. But they make their way. They defeat the beast pirate ships that are there. They make their way through the Torii Gate into Onigashima. Once they get to Onigashima, they then have it that Kinemon uses his, robe fruit, his garb fruit, to put all of them into the beast pirate disguises, including Shinobu. Because she's kind of been part of, given the task of, okay, let's make our way inside and then hopefully we can try to rescue Momonosuke. Is kind of where she ends up. She ends up in the Brachio tank with Usopp, Chopper, Nami, and Carrot. Much to Sanji's dismay. Sanji's lucky bastard when it comes to Usopp, who's riding in the Brachio tank with the 3 women. Which is just funny. And they're making their way through. They have to sneak around the side and everything else like that. One of the things that happens is Shinobu's group, or they kind of get separated at some point in time, and it's Shinobu, Nami, and Carrot end up dealing with just a random group of beast pirates, and Nami and Carrot essentially flirt their way past, and then the beast pirates and kind of insult Shinobu, so she does her special technique that results in certain areas on the certain beast pirates getting hit very hard, and they just kind of go down, so they make their way through. Eventually, they make their way through the pleasure hall area and everything else like that, and they're all going off to go and look for Momonosuke. That's what their intention is, because they can sneak around easier than some of the guys can. So they're making their way through, and unfortunately, what ends up happening is their group ends up running into Prometheus. Who then informs Big Mom where they are, and then they get chased around. Nami and Carrot get captured, and then Shinobu manages to sneak away. So she's able to make her way undetected to where Momonosuke is. By this point in time, Momonosuke is being kind of, held and, is captured and, chained to, the X that they have up there. While, Orochi and Kaido are making speeches and everything else like that, and Momonosuke is trapped up there. So Shinobu manages to make her way up there, where she is using her, mature fruit, her ripe fruit abilities to try to, essentially, melt the chains in small bits so it's not noticed, so she can try to get Momonosuke off of where he is captured. So that's one of the things that's going on. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is King notices her, grabs her, and just throws her off the platform. Thankfully, Momonosuke had like her kite trick, so she was fine. And then Sanji in his raid suit managed to free Momonosuke the rest of the way, and then passes Momonosuke off to Shinobu. And then they fly off. Momonosuke that didn't work. Shinobu and Momonosuke are then essentially, Shinobu's intention is to try to get Momonosuke to a safe place. Which, given the fact that at this point in time, between Kaido decapitating Orochi and the Scabbards showing up and attacking Kaido and the numbers showing up, and just like the battle has already started at this point in time, with the Beast Pirates versus the Alliance, and like all of that stuff is what's going on now. It's in full swing by the time this is happening. So Shinobu's plan is to try to get Momonosuke to someplace safe. Unfortunately, Shinobu really does not know her way around Onigashima, and a safe place on Onigashima would be a very hard place to find. So Shinobu is kind of like, dealing with like minor riffraff here and there. And then Yamato shows up. Well, Luffy and Yamato show up. And Yamato shows up and is like identifying himself as Oden to Shinobu and Momonosuke, which doesn't go well, even though Luffy explicitly like tells Shinobu and Momonosuke that they can trust Yamato. They're not so sure about that, which is fair. I mean, they have never met Yamato before. They have no inclination as to who the F Yamato is. He's claiming to be Oden and Momonosuke's father, which is just a very weird way of putting it, given the circumstances. That was a very deep sigh. And so they're essentially kind of getting chased around the live stage by Yamato, as Yamato is trying to convince them to let him help them. Which eventually comes to a head because Shinobu and Momonosuke run into Sasaki's platoon, his armored platoon. And, Shinobu is wounded while trying to protect Momonosuke during this time frame, but then Yamato steps in and, protects them and, kind of proves himself, attacks Sasaki, and eventually Frankie shows up and ends up fighting against Sasaki in the General Frankie. And Momonosuke and Shinobu are like a little bit more willing to follow Yamato, a little bit more willing to let Yamato help them. And Shinobu even kind of begs Yamato to protect Momonosuke. And Yamato just essentially like grabs them and runs off after Frankie shows up and is fighting Sasaki and Hacha and everything else like that. Runs off. There's a giant hole that gets created in the floor, and they kind of fall through that into some of the sub-basements, essentially, is what's happening. And they fall through there and run off and hide that way. Eventually, they make it out of the Skull Dome. And at this point, they've realized that Kaido has already lifted the entire island above sea level because their intention was to try to escape on one of the boats. Which was a good idea. I mean, all three of you have devil fruit, so you can't really swim at that point in time, should something happen. But it was a good idea. If anything, they could have hopped on, like, the Thousand Sunny or something. Because, like, Shinobu and Momonosuke would have known that that was Luffy's ship. And they're like, oh, we can get on this ship and sail this way, or whatever the case may be. Or steal one of the Beast Pirate ships and sneak away unimpeded, which would have resulted in a different ending to Wano, but still, wouldn't have been a bad idea at the time. But they can't escape that way, so they end up going off and they end up hiding in one of the storerooms inside of the dome. And while they're there, Yamato then ends up explaining to Shinobu and Momonosuke about his story, about how he knows Ace and everything else like that, and then how he has Oden's logbook that Yamato then pulls out and gives to Momonosuke. And what ends up happening is, that he gives Momonosuke the book, and Momonosuke is like sitting there and like reading through his father's journal that he never really got the chance to read while Oden was alive. And that Yamato has like worn down the pages, like memorizing. And Shinobu is kind of like, oh, I can't read that. I can't read that. Just like reading over Momonosuke's shoulder through her fingers. As Momonosuke is like reading through all of these adventures that his father had been on, including making his way to, you know, meeting Whitebeard and Roger, and then going to Laugh-Tale and finding out all of that information. And, you know, a bunch of that stuff. So Momonosuke is kind of learning about his future in regards to like what his role will be in the future. His role as Shogun of Wano, his role as one of the protectors of Wano, and, you know, carrying on Odin's will and everything as he reads through the logbook. Unfortunately, a little while later, because we kind of cut away for a little bit and then come back, we find that they end up coming across this mouse with this eye mask on, and Yamato picks it up and explains that this is a Mary. This is a little cyborg that Kaido uses for surveillance, that then like sends that information back to like various other Beast Pirate members that can, you know, keep an eye on what's going on. We see that with Bao Wong and a couple of the other like at least one of the entertainers that's in the room with the CP0 agents that are, it's like telling them what's going on with like who's flipping and flopping sides and everything else like that as they're like tracking it on the Go board. Which, looking back, the Go board that they were using is kind of that they were using to show like, you know, how much they had with the Beast Pirates versus the Alliance, and how much smaller the Alliance was versus Kaido's crew. And then as it slowly whittled down on the Beast Pirate side, and how so many of the Beast Pirates either change sides because of what Chopper does because of Chopper's actions after Queen, poisons all of them with the Isoni virus, and then Chopper saves them. That kind of causes a chunk of them to switch sides. Plus, Tama showing up and using her Kibi Kibi no Mi on the members of the Beast Pirates that are the Smile users, that are the gifters, and shifting a bunch of them over to the side that is on Luffy's side because Tom is on that side. And like, you know, they're all flipping the pieces over and everything else like that. So it's essentially a more, you know, it's a much larger game in regards to what we are, or at least at the time of recording this, and how it should land when it goes up. What is going on with the Domi Reversi in Elbath at the moment. So it's like an interesting thing there, which I meant to bring up in another video, and I might still bring it up in one of the chapter reviews, but we'll see what happens. But so Yamato explains that this is just like a surveillance mouse, that one of the Marys that they use to keep track of everything. So like, oh my god, we can't stay here anymore because our location's been compromised and they know where they are. So they're like, okay, where are we going to go now? So they're like, okay. Beast Pirates end up storming into the warehouse. Yamato hides Momonosuke inside of his, you know, clothes. And then Yamato and Shinobu end up fighting their way through the Beast Pirate group that showed up there. Eventually, they end up in the Right Brain Tower. Don't remember where that is. And they end up, they're in a safer place now. I'm assuming they did like a sweep of the area to make sure there were no Marys in the area. But they are now there. And, this is when, Momonosuke changes into his dragon form that looks like an eel, as everybody keeps saying it does. And he says that he's disgusted with this form. And he's disgusted with himself because everybody thinks so highly of him, yet he just sees himself as weak and foolish. And Shinobu denies this, and she calls him brave because he is brave. It took courage for him to eventually, at Punk Hazard to, help Luffy a bit. And then when they're on Zou, it took courage for him to ask Luffy sincerely to ask Luffy to help them with defeating Kaido. And when Momonosuke, stood up at the prison, and revealed himself to be Kozuki Momonosuke to all of the prisoners that were there. And then even just shortly, a little while ago in this same time frame, in the same evening, when he proclaims that he is the son of Kozuki Oden to Kaido. And of course, we're going to see his bravery more and more throughout the course of the evening. But, Shinobu was like, no, you are brave. And this is like he transforms into the dragon, which surprises the two because Yamato has not seen this. And Shinobu saw it. Shinobu saw it earlier when they were back at Curry Castle before Kaido Boro-breathed it out of existence. She saw Momonosuke there as a dragon and was surprised by it. Eventually, he does return to human form after he kind of gets calmed down and everything. And he says, because it's his combination of his observation haki and his voice of all things, and he tells him that Luffy is still fighting Kaido, but he's very weak. And he's shocked, and Shinobu is just shocked about how he knew this. So they end up eventually making their way, they're still working their way through Onigashima, past various battles and stuff like that are going on, past various other groups of beast pirates. And eventually Shinobu is contacted by Kinemon. And she says that they are hid in a crawl space between the first and second floors. Yamato has left to now act as a decoy at this point in time, making the little mini Momonosuke doll that I don't know how stupid Yamato thinks the beast pirates are, but that's not a good decoy of Momonosuke, but sure. So Momonosuke and Shinobu and Momonosuke are now hiding in this crawl space, and they manage to contact Kinemon about this. And while this is going on, Momonosuke is reading through the logbook and everything, getting more information about stuff that he had heard about his father, but now he's getting to hear about it more in his father's own words, which is a bit of a different feeling. And so they're going through that. And eventually what ends up happening is, of course, what ends up happening is, as it's coinciding when Luffy gets defeated by Kaido up on the roof and gets knocked off of Onigashima, Momonosuke just gets this horrible headache, and Shinobu is very confused as to what is happening, and she's just trying to comfort him. At the same time, they are found by Kinemon and Kiku. And, they're trying to help calm Momonosuke down, and Momonosuke ends up grabbing the Mary that they managed to find again, or that found them, and is shouting into the Mary to use it essentially as a loudspeaker to broadcast to the island that Luffy is not dead, Luffy is not gone, he will come back and he will still defeat Kaido. And so Shinobu is there while that is happening, and then they have to deal with the fake Oden that shows up, because Momonosuke and Shinobu are not aware that there is this fake Oden that is running around. So they have the, Kanjuro disguised as the fake Oden comes up through the door in the floor, and Shinobu is just oh, Lord Oden, oh my, and Momonosuke is oh, Father, and Kiku and Kinemon are no, it's not Oden, it's Kanjuro, it's a disguise, it's fake, it's a fraud. We've already dealt with this a little while ago. He killed Ashura, and all of that. And Kiku tries to fight Oden Kanjuro, doesn't go well, she gets stabbed, and then Kinemon does manage to defeat Kanjuro, and does technically land the killing blow, but it still takes Kanjuro a little while to die, because he's still got to make the Kanzen bow and everything. But at that point in time is when Kaido shows up in front of them. and is attempting to smash both Shinobu and Momonosuke. This leads to Kinemon intervening and getting hurt himself. And at this point in time, this results in, because there's a giant hole in the wall, Shinobu and Momonosuke essentially leap out of the hole in the wall and, fly off. They make their way out, and then they end up, managing to get up to part of the roof, and then they end up having to run away from Kaido again, because he has unfinished business with him, because Momonosuke actually stood up to him earlier. And Kaido doesn't like that. He's like, now Momonosuke is a threat, which I'll go into more when I do Momonosuke's videos. For, the perspective there. And Momonosuke and Shinobu uses her devil fruit powers to rot away part of the roof, and then they manage the ground, which crumbles, and then they're able to fly off and fly down away from Onigashima and toward the shore, where Luffy is, where he was saved by the Beast Pirates, and where they're currently giving him CPR. By the way, even if I was the doctor of the crew, it's okay, the thing about the Heart Pirates, about Law's crew, is that, they find Luffy, and they initially, it's okay, well, we got to get him inside of the sub, obviously, or we got to get him out of the water because he's drowning and he's a devil fruit user, and that's not good. So, what are we going to do? So, they eventually do get him, but I'm y'all don't know what to do when someone has been partially drowned or something like that. If I was on a crew of pirates or whatever, if I was in the One Piece world and I was on a crew of any pirates, which probably wouldn't happen because I do not have the desire to fight, but if for some reason I was, I'd be okay, I need to know basic first aid for if someone is hurt or if someone has been partially drowned. I need to know what to do besides just CPR, obviously, if necessary. But what else do I need to do? What else is a good thing for me to know how to do? Would be a wise decision to know. I mean, Nami kind of performed that role before they got Chopper. And then they got Chopper, and now, they have Chopper. But I kind of think that, Robin and Nami may have, taken a little bit of, learned a little bit from Chopper in case something happens and Chopper can't help them. That would have been a wise decision to make. But what ends up happening is, of course, Shinobu and Momonosuke make their way down to the shore where they find Luffy and the Heart Pirates. And Caribou is there as well, and he gives Luffy a bunch of food and everything else like that. And they talk to Luffy, who's who woke up by this point in time. And he's like, Momonosuke, I'm gonna need you to do something for me. What, Luffy? I need you to fly me back up there. And he's pointing at Onigashima, which is currently making its way across the island while flying in the sky toward the flower capital to crush the flower capital. I need you to fly me up there. And Momonosuke is are you insane? Is essentially the what ends up happening there. And Luffy is you're the only one that can do this. You have to do this. And Shinobu is there while all of this is happening. And Momonosuke takes Shinobu aside and is just I need you to do something for me. And she's and what is that, young master, or young lord, whatever she keeps calling him? And he's and we don't hear the conversation, but part of the conversation that we do get, we don't hear the full conversation, but she says, but if I do that, it'll be irreversible, and I can't change you back. And he's but you can do it, right? And she's well, yes, but... And, she doesn't want to do it, but she does. She gives in to Momonosuke. And we find out what happens. She uses her powers, her mature jutsu, her ripening jutsu, to age Momonosuke up 20 years to where he will be physically 28 years old to match how old he is chronologically. Now, as has been stated, this does not change Momonosuke's mental age. He is still an 8-year-old child in the body of a 28-year-old, but now he at least physically has a better ability to be able to fight and to physically hold the role of shogun that he will have within like the next 2 hours, if that. I know Onigashima takes course over like one night, but it's like, okay, how much longer do we have now, hour-wise, before, sunrise or whatever the case may be. And what ends up happening is, so she does this, she ages him up. And he looks so much like Odin, and she is just overcome with the emotions. And of course, he shifts into his dragon form. And Luffy's like, okay, here we go. And Luffy jumps on Momonosuke, and they fly off. Now, and at this point in time, I think Shinobu essentially just kind of stays with the Heart Pirates. She watches as, like, they fly off toward Onigashima, and like the rest of the Heart Pirates don't manage to make their way to Onigashima because they can't, it's flying and their submarine doesn't fly. So I'm assuming what ends up happening is they like essentially like are making their way, like following Onigashima in the sky, like how the wise men follow the star to Jesus. I'm just gonna throw that out there. But like they're following Onigashima, so that way it's like they can be as close as possible if something should happen. And Shinobu's like, well, I can't go after them. I can't fly up there with them, but I can go this way, and maybe there's something else I can do. It's assumedly what happens because we don't see Shinobu for a while. For essentially like a good chunk of the rest of the battle. And for the rest of the night. The next time we do see Shinobu is Momonosuke. Kaido has been defeated. Big Mom has been defeated. They've both been dropped through various holes and into a volcano. And Momonosuke has managed to safely land Onigashima. And not on top of the flower capital, so nobody got hurt in that regard. And, like, the fire on Onigashima was put out. Shinobu didn't even know about the fire. She was unaware of the fire unless they could see, like, flames coming out of part of Onigashima as it's, like, flying toward the flower capital. They're like, oh, well, that's not good. But, okay, from, like, Shinobu and, like, the Heart Pirates that are with her at this point in time, and probably Caribou. Stupid Caribou. Essentially, what ends up happening is, like, they are looking up as this is happening. So, like, they're getting, like, a very odd perspective on what's going on. Like, Kaido being in his giant dragon form, flying around. Luffy eventually going gear 5th and, like, being just, like, big, giant Luffy and, like, fighting Kaido that way. Like, their perspective on the ground is, like, are you seeing this too? Yeah, I am. Is he using the dragon as a jump rope? I guess. Shinobu, I am so confused right now. Just like the rest of the Heart Pirates. Yeah, so are we. Stale pictures. That'd be funny. But like we don't exactly know what's going on, but like they would have had like this view of like parts of the battle going on. Even like, well, maybe not necessarily. I mean, like, Onigashima was, like, far enough away that they wouldn't have seen everything, obviously. But, like, they would have seen, like, bits of it. And they probably would have seen, like, the big final bit with, like, Momonosuke trying to pull Onigashima away while Kaido's in his big, like, magma dragon form. That attack while Luffy is, like, here comes the giant fist and everything. As he's, getting ready to punch Kaido, and, like, Momonosuke gets Onigashima out of the way, and Luffy punches Kaido, which defeats Kaido, and then he falls. So, like, they would have had a very interesting perspective of all that was going on there. But eventually, Momonosuke, lands Onigashima, Kaido's defeated, blah, 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 blah. And the next time that we see Shinobu is when they are all making their way into the flower capital, where Momonosuke flew over the flower capital, and, flies them all to, they all get to the flower capital, and they're all entering the flower capital and returning with him and the Scabbards and Hiyori and everything, and Shinobu is there as part of, the shadows and everything. To, calm the panicking citizens and everything else like that. And, like, the citizens are just overjoyed about everything. And, yeah, that's, like, the next time that we see Shinobu. You know, they're just like, oh, it's the 9 red Scabbards, and Momonosuke, and Hiyori, and Momonosuke is the new Shogun of Wano, and everything else like that as it's being broadcast around the country. And, like, all of the Scabbards, as I pointed out multiple times with the Scabbards throughout the course of the series, is that, including Momonosuke, there's just this huge amount of relief off of their shoulders. Kaido is gone. Orochi is dead. They have freed Wano. You know, Momonosuke has returned to claim his rightful place as Shogun. And they have fulfilled their promise that they made to Oden, even though, like, Ashura and Izo died, and, you know, Yasue died, and everything else like that. So it's just this huge amount of emotional relief that they are finally being able to enjoy, to take in. And what ends up happening is, of course, you know, from there, you know, we cut to about a week later when Luffy and Zoro finally wake up. And Shinobu is part of, like, all the women that are in the bath. She's with the women in the bath. And then they're all out just enjoying all of the festivities that are going on as, like, the second fire festival that is going on. You know, celebrating the defeat of Oden, or not the defeat of Oden, the defeat of Kaido and the death of Orochi, and, you know, Momonosuke's rise to Shogun and everything else like that. During said festival, Shinobu, along with the other retainers, all end up sensing Ryukogu showing up. Admiral Ryukogu, Aramaki, Green Bull, take your pick. And they all head out to go and fight him. Well, first I think they try to reason with him, which is fair. It's like, okay, let's start with diplomacy, see what happens there. Diplomacy didn't work. Aramaki's way too far up his own a-hole. And they then end up having to fight against Aramaki. And, like, you know, it's Shinobu and the rest of the Scabbards that are there, except for Kinemon. And, you know, Momonosuke is helping. And Yamato even shows up to help. Now, through the course of this battle, they find out that they are just not a good matchup for Aramaki's Devil Fruit power, because he has, you know, the Logia ability of the forest, of the Mori no Mi. And so he's kind of really hard to kill. During this time frame, he ends up stabbing both Shinobu and Raizo, and, like, drains them of their moisture, of their nutrients. And even after taking a Boro breath from Momonosuke, he's still fine, essentially. Thankfully, Shanks shows up and just uses his haki to just scare the crap out of Ryukogu, and he just runs away. The Scabbards and such make their way back to the castle where Shinobu and Raizo are being treated after having all of their nutrients drained from them. And, you know, they're all like, oh no, what's going to happen to them? And then we cut to, like, a little bit later, and Shinobu has made a full recovery, and she has lost so much of her excess body fat that she now resembles her, like, herself when she was, like, 20 years younger, like, way back during the Oden flashback is what she looks like now. And I'm like, you know, as someone who has been overweight a good chunk of their life, I wouldn't mind that technique. Just like, okay, you're gonna suck all the fat out of my body. Okay. And then when you wake up again, also, you're gonna be, like, you know, much thinner. I'd be like, okay. Type of a thing in that regard. It's like extreme liposuction is essentially what ends up happening. But, like, so she's back to, like, her thin self. Although I love the fact that Shinobu's pride in her appearance, she still had the pride in her own appearance, even when a lot of people didn't think that she was, you know, beautiful anymore. She's like, screw you, yes I am. Whack! And I love that. I love Shinobu's opinion about that. I could very easily try to cosplay as Shinobu. That would be fun. But like, so, and then it's also revealed that Shinobu will be taking Tama under her wing as her apprentice to be a kunoichi, because that's of course what Tama wants to become. From there, we then cut to where it is time for, the Straw Hats to leave. Shinobu is essentially, I think, going to be trying to train, like, Shinobu and Raizo are probably going to be, Raizo later becomes the daimyo of Udon, but Shinobu is, I think, working on trying to, like, train, like, the next generation of the Mimawari Gumi. Is that what it was, or was that the samurai? Or was it the whatever the royal guard essentially is, like, training the new batch of, like, what Fuku Rokuju used to be like. She's like training like the next generation of it, and Tama is like the first one for that. And so that's what their assumedly that's what their intention is. Shinobu and such all say goodbye to the Straw Hats and the Heart Pirates when it's time for them to leave, and they head off. And Shinobu is part of the big picture that we see at the end of Wano of the group there. After they get like the flag from the Straw Hats. Then we get into the Egghead Island arc. And during Egghead Island, we cut back to Wano during Vegapunk's message. We know that they had like the earthquake that happened that they felt, that was felt around the world. And then now we get Vegapunk's message. And as they are listening to the message, we see Shinobu, still thin, with Tama, Momonosuke, and Kinemon, as they had managed to find one of the transponder snails that Orochi still had, that was still laying about. Which, to a degree, I definitely would have like kept one of those, because I'd be like, well, let's keep one of these things. This will be very useful in case we have to communicate with someone outside of Wano, because like the pond snails are great for communicating within Wano, but this thing we need to communicate outside of Wano. So we have that. And then we get into the Oni Child Yamato's, Golden Harvest surrogate pilgrimage, the Yamato's journey around Wano. And when we see Shinobu here, we see her at Amagasa Village, where her and Tama are currently training, and where she has Tama practicing throwing her kunai knives, the little knives that the ninjas throw. And so we see Tama training that way, and we see Shinobu just overlooking this. And at that point in time, Shinobu is now big again. So apparently what Aramaki did is not permanent. That, or it was like a drawing error, but don't know. At the time of this recording, we have not seen Shinobu through any other part of the cover page story. She wasn't part of them trying to go and save the sword and go and deal with who's who and that type of stuff. She was just there in the one cover page where we saw her training Tama, which is fine. Tama and Yamato managed to handle who's who just fine, so that wasn't an issue. Who's who and Hold'em and such just fine, but we haven't seen Shinobu yet. Assumedly, she'll show up again later at some point in time. She's not a daimyo. She's just training Tama at this point in time. They'll probably show back up maybe during part of the final war. We might cut back to Wano at some point in time between now and then. I guess there's a possibility we might see her again at the end of Yamato's cover story, but don't know. Probably not. Yeah. For other stuff that Shinobu could do, there's not really much else that she could do. Technically, I guess she could use her power to, rot away, the walls that are around Wano, as opposed to having, Zunisha, destroy them. She could rot them away in some sections so they could slowly lower the water out of the Wano basin, which would be a good use of her ability. as opposed to like draining all of the water at once. They could like slowly like chip away at the stuff around the outside as it like lowers it down and down and down. But again, that's just a little idea of what they could use her power for. They could also use her ability to, actually, this is just like a hindsight thing of something that they could have done to help, that her power could have been used for, is since it is the ripe fruit, like ripening fruit, is essentially like you bring her like fruit and vegetables that aren't fully grown yet, and she can like make them grow faster, and then you can have like a harvest faster, would be like a good way of using that devil fruit. But that's what I have here for Shinobu. I thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the video. After this, I will be doing the Kaido videos, and then I'll be moving on to the new generation of Wano, which will be Tama and Toko, and then Momonosuke and Hiyori will be finishing up Wano. So that's what I have. As I said, I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!